Minitab is the leading global provider of software and services for quality improvement and statistics education. Quality Analysis Results. For more information, visit minitab.com.
This podcast is available at keithbauer.com.
Hello, today I'm going to talk about the ideas behind control charting. Now, it was Walter Shewhart on May the 16th, 1924, who really put together this idea of what we now call control charts. I like to think about it this way. Let's say that you've got some overall mean, some average value for a typical system, and you know that there's going to be some variation around it. What Shewhart decided to do was to try and get a good idea as to what this variation would be that you would typically expect to see. Nowadays we call this common cause variation. So he's going to take that estimate of variation, this common cause variation, take the mean and go plus or minus 3 standard deviations. The idea is that if you get a value more than 3 standard deviations above or below this average value, then there's a very low probability of that occurring. If you go to many textbooks, they superimpose normal distributions and say, hey, if you go outside plus or minus 3 standard deviations, there's a low probability it's going to be 1 minus 0.9973. But if you go and look at what Shewhart originally wrote, his argument is far broader than this. He actually uses something called Chebyshev's inequality, which shows that for many distributions, regardless of normal distribution, if it's relatively symmetric and you go plus or minus 3 standard deviations, let's just say the probability of you falling outside is low. It's so low that it's going to be worthwhile from an economic perspective for us to go out and do some investigation, see if there is a special cause of variation that we would want to address. Now keep in mind that of course you could have a special cause of variation that's a good thing. Let's say if you're trying to get lower values and you see an unusually low value, that doesn't mean to say that you'd want to remove it. You'd want to investigate it and hopefully get the process to move down to that level. So in essence, what we're doing is we're considering these potential causes of variation that are being flagged by a point being outside of these control chart limits. There are other tests that we can perform as well though. Back in the 1950s, the Western Electric Handbook came out with a whole list of different tests that you can do, seeing whether or not points are increasing steadily over time or decreasing. Is there some kind of fluctuation above and below this center line? Keep in mind that the more tests that you use, you can put check marks next to them on any statistical software package for the ones that you actually want to employ. As you choose more of these tests, necessarily the false alarm rate is going to increase. You have to acknowledge that fact. But then again, there's a flip side to that. It's giving you an increased chance of detecting something if it's going to go wrong. So that's the whole point in why we would want to use these extra tests. How many data points do you need to use to start creating a control chart? It's a difficult question to answer. It depends. If you look in many textbooks, it'll say, take 20 subgroups of size 5 or 25 subgroups of size 4. It's only doing that because then you'd have 100 data points, so it'll make the math a lot easier. A lot of these textbooks are still using the assumption, I should caveat that, a lot of the older textbooks are basing it on the assumption that you're going to be doing handwritten calculations. Nowadays we've got computers to do this, so really it's up to you as to how many data points and the time frame that you feel comfortable you are capturing what you would expect this process to give you, these common causes of variation. When should we be adjusting a control chart? Sometimes I run into instances where people want to update these control chart limits once a month or 2 times a year. You should adjust your control chart limits when it is appropriate for you to do so. In other words, if something has changed, let's say you've switched to a new supplier, or there's been a change in the people who are actually running the line. Okay, something distinct, clear has happened. You should be adjusting the control chart limits accordingly, because what was the case before is not going to be the case going forward. That's a situation when you should be adjusting it. So I hope this has been useful. Of course, if you've got any questions on this or anything else, please feel free to email them to me through my website, keithbauer.com.
For more information on statistical methods for quality improvement, visit keithbauer.com.